Hi, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kristen and I post book videos every single week. So for today's video, I'm going to be doing a book review of The Light We Lost by Jill Santopolo. So I initially wasn't planning on doing a full review video for this book, and I was just going to talk about it in my July wrap-up. But since finishing it, I literally can't stop thinking about it. So I just decided to go ahead and do a full-length video just because I feel like I have a lot that I can say about this book. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very thought-provoking book. I did do like a short review on TikTok, and I was planning to just leave it at that, but I felt like I could have expanded on what I wanted to say and like all my thoughts on this book, so that's why I decided to go ahead and make this video. So just to give a little background of why I decided to read this book, just because I feel like this is a little bit relevant to why I ended up enjoying it so much. Basically, I had been feeling like reading a sad book, kind of like I wanted a book that was going to make me cry, and I had heard things about this book. I really didn't know much about it. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't really know anything. Basically, I just knew it was going to be a sad book, and so I felt like reading something kind of sad, and I was just looking at the books on my shelf. And usually when I don't know what to read next, I'll like open books and kind of read the first like line or paragraph or something and just kind of get an idea of how it starts, and maybe if it pulls me in, like I'll start reading it. But for some reason, I don't know why, I picked this book up, I started reading it, and I ended up reading the first chapter, and the chapters are extremely short. There's like 80 chapters in this, and it's only like 321 pages, so they're all like only a few pages long. And then all of a sudden I realized I had read like 3 chapters of the book, so I was like, okay, might as well continue reading it and finish it. And I finished it all within the same day, which is something that I never do. I just don't read books like in the same day. Like I've never started and finished a book in the same day, not because I'm not capable of it, but just because I just get bored. Or I don't get bored, but I just kind of like, I need a break. If I'm like reading for hours at a time, like I usually need to take a little bit of a break. But this one, I was just determined to finish it all like in the same day. So yeah, so now I'm gonna go into kind of the summary of the plot. I'm gonna try to like explain it without giving too much away, because I feel like it's kind of hard to explain this book, especially without giving away too many details of like what happens in the beginning. So this book follows Lucy and Gabe, and it's told in second person POV, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think I've ever read a book that was told in second person, and I actually really loved that about this book. At first I like realized it was in second person. I didn't know if it was going to continue being like that. I didn't know how I felt about it, but then I ended up really liking it a lot, because in this story Lucy is speaking to Gabe basically, and she's kind of telling their whole story, and it's in second person because she's talking to him, like he's the audience the whole time. So yeah, so I really ended up liking that about this book. But basically it follows the two of them. They meet when they're in college. They meet on September 11th 2001, so they met on the day of the 9/11 attacks, and they were in the same college class together. So he shows up to class, he sits next to her, and then after class that day they kind of stick together because obviously like they don't really know what's going on. By the way, this story also takes place in New York, so I forgot to mention that, but they are in New York City on the day of the 9/11 attack. So yeah, they kind of just decide to stick together that day. So she goes back with him to his dorm, and they just kind of spend some time together. They talk for a little bit. They kind of had this discussion of what they wanted for their lives and what they wanted for their futures, and they kind of talked about wanting something more for their lives and wanting to do something that has a purpose, and they just wanted their lives to like actually mean something once they reach the end of it. And so yeah, they have this whole discussion. However, they kind of go their separate ways after that, and then they end up like running into each other again and then going their separate ways again. It's very much a right person wrong time story, but they bump into each other again at one point later on, and at that point they do start up a relationship and they eventually start to fall for each other. But then Gabe gets a job in the Middle East as a photographer, and of course Lucy at this point, she already like has her life set in New York. She has her career there, and so of course that puts them at this position where they're on 2 different paths basically. And so yeah, after that, that's kind of like what happens in the beginning. That's where you get like their initial story. All of that pretty much is in the synopsis, like in the book, so I didn't really give too much away. And so you kind of go through like 13 years of their lives, and you kind of see all that they do, mostly Lucy because it is like in her perspective and she's kind of sharing the story through her eyes, and you kind of see like the way that Gabe comes like in and out of her life, and you see all of what she experiences through those years and the way she eventually starts to live her life and has certain things kind of happen in her life. So yeah, but through all of that she is always kind of thinking about Gabe, and he's someone that kind of never like really left her heart. Like he's someone that she's just always like loved and cared about and thought about. And so that's kind of like the main plot of the book, but there are kind of a lot of different like topics and questions that come up throughout this book that I thought were really interesting. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of go into some of that and kind of share my thoughts on that. So this book discusses the whole topic of like fate versus free will. Basically the whole idea that your life is already like planned out and it's fated to go a certain way, and like that's what's gonna happen because that's already like the plan, versus having like the free will to make decisions in life, and whatever choice you make, that's gonna lead you down different paths. I personally like talking about this topic and reading about it. I just think it's a really interesting concept of like fate versus, you know, making making choices and seeing where that leads you. So I feel like this book, most of it was the main character Lucy kind of questioning that, like the whole time, like kind of questioning whether or not her and Gabe were like meant to be together, like it was fate that brought them together, or if it just like kind of wasn't something that was meant to be because of everything that goes on through the 13 years of their story. And she just talks a lot about the different choices that they made at different points in their life, because there's so many turning points in their lives that she discusses, and just so many like monumental things that happened to them that like really affect the both of them. She just kind of like thinks about those things a lot, and she constantly thinks like, what if this happened instead, and like what if one of them said something at this point, and just stuff like that. They do face a lot of like really life-changing things and really huge decisions and just huge things that affect their lives in like really big ways, you know? So I see like why she questioned it so much and kind of thought about different things in her life and the way things would have gone if she had done certain things differently, or even if like Gabe had done certain things differently. So I just really loved that whole concept of this book, and I think like in the end she kind of does come to a conclusion, and so I just really loved the overall message and the overall point of this book and just the story as a whole. I thought it was a really just beautiful story. So now kind of going into the characters, they did a lot of really dumb things, and they made a lot of bad choices in my opinion, where I was like really annoyed and frustrated with these characters, but I liked that. I thought that was just a really like realistic way to see it, because they were flawed people and like they weren't perfect and they did stupid things, and so it was nice to see that, like to see them kind of have to face hardships because of the choices that they made, and kind of seeing like the way it affected them. And so I just really liked that these characters were written that way, and I just feel like it kind of made it more realistic in a way, because most of the time in life you kind of maybe make dumb decisions, or you like do things that maybe later on you look back and realize like you shouldn't have done that. I don't know, it's just really interesting, especially like the relationship aspect of this story, because a lot of it was her kind of questioning like the choices that they made as a couple and kind of how that affected them. They didn't really think about other people, I feel like, when they made certain choices, and they kind of were really only thinking about themselves. They were honestly kind of selfish, and I don't know, I just thought that was a really interesting thing too, like seeing that and seeing the way that they acted in these different situations. But like I said, I really loved that. Like I loved that they weren't perfect people, and you actually get to see like the consequences of their actions and their choices, and you see that she kind of realized like maybe she shouldn't have done certain things. But another big part of this book that I want to talk about obviously is like the whole love story. Eventually she does meet someone else, and that is in the synopsis, so I'm not like giving anything away with that. I won't give anything away about how that played out, like how that relationship played out, but I thought it was really interesting to see the comparison of the two relationships, of how she felt about Gabe versus this other person. And I just really liked seeing that, even though it was kind of like heartbreaking, because she loved Gabe first and she had this like really deep, like all-consuming love for him, and it was a very different type of love when she met this other guy. And so even then, like she was still constantly thinking about Gabe. Like after that, it was just interesting to see the type of people that her and Gabe were versus the type of person she was with the other guy, and you kind of see like why these two stories, love stories, went the way that they did based on like the type of person that Gabe is in comparison to the other guy. His name's Darren, but yeah, it's just she meets these two guys, you know, and you kind of see like those comparisons, and you see the type of people they are and the way those relationships play out. And then of course she's kind of making these comparisons too, so like that was interesting to see that, and seeing kind of the way she felt about one guy versus the other. While I didn't exactly love the love stories, because I feel like there was issues with both relationships that she had, I did really love the idea of the two different types of love that she experienced, and like seeing those differences, you know, like seeing that whole kind of like all-consuming like passionate love that she had with Gabe versus kind of like the more safe but like comforting love with Darren. So I really loved the idea of Gabe and Lucy's love, but you kind of see the way it affected her and the way it ended up affecting her other relationship and just affected her entire life. But seeing like how it affected everything kind of made me not love their love story, I guess. But same with the other love story, like seeing how that was affected by everything that she had gone through, I kind of like didn't love that love story either. So I just ended up really loving all the overall messages of this story and just everything that I discussed, like with falling in love and with fate and your choices and all of that. Like I just thought it was all really interesting to read about and to like really think about. And I found this book to just be like one of those books where I kept thinking about it afterwards, and I just really loved that about it, that it was like something that really had me questioning things and kind of made me think about my own view on things. So yeah, I ended up really enjoying that. I personally love like really thought-provoking books like this. Even if I like have a certain opinion on things, like I just like seeing kind of the way it plays out and everything. But anyway, this book is a really sad book. Like I said earlier, I was sobbing while I was reading this one. I finished it at like 2 a.m. and I literally just like was crying so much. Like it made me so sad after I finished reading it. Like just like thinking about this book and like everything about it, and like just all of the different things that happen in this book, and like the different concepts that it discussed and the different messages that it had. And it completely broke me, but it was a really amazing story. I really love books like this that are just like really thoughtful like this. I feel like I hadn't read like a really just amazing like thought-provoking book like this in a really long time, so I'm glad that I finally like got to read one and that it was this one. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so amazing. I really loved the whole story, even if it did put me through unnecessary pain, but it was so good. It was a 5-star read. I just literally keep thinking about it, and I'm sure I'm going to continue to keep thinking about it. But yeah, if you've read this book, definitely let me know any of your thoughts on it. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked this and you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would stick around and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.